Welcome, everyone. And as you know, I'm always delighted to have my guests on today, and nothing is no different today in terms of the amazing Antony Cousins, who I met way back when in a previous life when I was doing a little bit of advisory work. I'm doing inverted commas for a startup that he was working for called Profinder. Antony's headline, and we always know that I read headlines, needs some work, Antony. Chief Executive Officer at Factmata, which is actually, this is a really, really interesting and really, really important topic, which I was keen to get Antony on. And before I let Antony speak, if you actually look at Antony's background, I hadn't actually quite realised this. Forgive me for not doing as much research as I should. You're basically a spook, former spook, UK MOD, counter-terrorism, UK MOD, this is all a front. You're a spook, really and truly. But I will then be quiet and I will let Antony introduce himself. So who, what, why, when, where, and let's see where this goes.
Okay, I'm not a spook, but the problem is as soon as you say you're not a spook, everyone goes, that's what a spook would say. I was a civilian and I worked for the Ministry of Defense and I worked with the armed forces. Yes, I went to Iraq and Afghanistan and I worked to counter Taliban propaganda and did some interesting things, which makes you sound like a spook, but I honestly wasn't. My background. So I have I think a weird background, which makes sense when I explain it. But if you look at it from my LinkedIn profile, it's like, what the hell was this guy doing? I started out in IT, and actually the first 7 years of my career I started out as a developer, building applications and databases and technologies that kids these days haven't even heard of. I did 7 years of straight IT work, which has given me a really interesting, I think, perspective on the rest of my career, because as almost all jobs have become more technical, my ability to work closely with developers or basically work quite closely with systems has been really valuable. So yeah, 7 years of straight IT work, and then I got on this leadership scheme in the MOD called MIDIT. Shout out all the MIDIT folk. That really gave me exposure to a whole bunch of different types of roles. So the aim of that program was to make you a broadly deployable leader. So yes, the first job I got was in the press office, which was a real rude awakening because it was the height of the Iraq and Afghan conflicts. So we were front page news every day. So being in a press office where you're dealing with front page news every day, that becomes normal. I didn't realize how rare that actually is for most press officers.
Right.
It's like, oh, it's front page again. Okay, great. Or not, depending on the story. But it was also really good to see kind of the diversity of the team. Is actually one of the things that stayed with me the rest of my career is the importance of the diversity of the team. So in the press office, we were a mixture of press officers, armed forces personnel, career, journalists, civil servants like myself. Really good team, learned a lot. Went to Iraq and Afghanistan. That's where I got my first kind of taste of this particular problem, actually. Not the fake news problem, but basically fake news is propaganda and disinformation by another name. So in Iraq and Afghanistan, seeing Taliban propaganda, seeing kind of Al-Qaeda's single narrative, and started seeing the real world impact of those lies. And that was really kind of fascinating and game changing for me in terms of my perspective of the importance of communications, the importance of language narratives, and the importance of online media. And then kind of went from there into counterterrorism, which was much more about Al-Qaeda's single narrative, and understanding how people are radicalized and how people are impacted by words online. Then from there into the Middle East, and I was I think on one of the first diplomatic missions into Egypt after the fall of Mubarak. The social media revolution, which for me is I think the pinnacle almost of what we've achieved with social media, when it was still a relatively new technology, and people in Egypt figured out that they could organize themselves faster and better on social media than they ever had before, and faster than the security apparatus never had the need to respond. So that for me was like the pinnacle. That was demonstrating that with social media, with enough people gathered together around a single clear need, you can achieve anything you want, including get yourself a new government. So that was the top. And then obviously over the course of the last 10 years, it's gone slightly downhill. Just a little bit. So seeing, I guess, the challenges, not just with the Brexit campaign, but also with the 2016 election, 2019 election. The technologies that social media platforms rolled out to enable companies to sell better, then obviously got hijacked by people who worked out that's just a great way to monetize content. Doesn't matter if that content is true, false, sexist, racist. In fact, in some cases, the more sexist and the more racist, the better, because it angers people, it gets people engaged, etc. So over the course of the last 10 years, obviously these things have got really bad. And then over the last couple of years, I've become more interested in kind of working on that as really the focus of my career. So making best use of my IT background, my kind of experience at kind of PR and comms, and my experience, when we first met at ProFinder, working with specifically machine learning and NLP type technologies, which since 2014, right? Because ProFinder was one of the first, kind of focusing on that. So I think that kind of puts me in a unique perspective, unique position with my real world experience and my technology and PR experience to focus on this particular problem. And that brings me to Factmata. So joined just a few weeks ago, even though I've been working with Drew, the founder, for months now.
Awesome.
So
it's around, for those of you who haven't figured out, that A, Antony is not a spook, wink, wink, but B, it's around the challenge we now face in the modern world of kind of disinformation. And this is B2B, B2C. This is everything. If we look at kind of what's happening in B2B, which is the angle we're going to look at in terms of where Factmata can come in, is that to your point, you could be a person in a garage, access to the internet, access to the social media channels. You create content, you create enough content that's going to cause division or conversation, and then off you go. And I was only talking to my wife last night about some of the things that they're now looking at with some of the larger organizations who should remain nameless, about the challenges that are now coming through EU legislation, cookies, all this kind of stuff, and what that means. But it's a real problem, and notwithstanding the world that our children are going to be growing up in. And I guess it goes on a good thinking of my history. I mean, this has been with us forever in terms of propaganda way back when you leaflet drop, you're paying your Nazi Germany and so on, and then toppling governments. It takes me back to the behind the scenes or undercover footage of Alexander Nix, the chairman, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica. We can create or fall governments if you want us to do that, just purely through social. So fact matter, yes. What, who, what, why, what is it? What's the story? Because you told me the story offline. It's fascinating. I think our listeners will be interested to hear this, and then we can unpack it a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely, and it makes the link, I think, between that kind of that fake news problem and actually B2B. So I like most people, I think, from Brexit onwards, and from some of the really good TED Talks that have been on the subject, from some of the Netflix documentaries that have been on the subject, The Social Dilemma, which I think was a big one that kind of hit the mainstream. People have become more aware of this problem of fake news and disinformation. And that's where Factmata got its start kind of 4 years ago now, building the technology to work on that problem, like fake news. How do we identify it? How do we fight it, etc. And there's a whole bunch of other companies in that space as well doing that kind of work. So that's where we started out, and that's where we focused on kind of underlying technologies to identify it, to flag it in all its varieties. And that's a problem that needs to be solved, but it's not, in my opinion, a commercially sustainable, business proposition, right? Because for every lie that's told, there's an organization that's on the receiving end of that lie. For every piece of fake news or disinformation about a coronavirus vaccine, right, there's a pharmaceutical company whose bottom line is going to be impacted by that. And the fact-checking part of this is a really important part of the truth ecosystem, but it's not a commercially sustainable kind of startup kind of venture that, from our opinion, because effectively you're putting manual labor into a never-ending kind of exponentially growing problem of the lies that are being shared online. And you're trying to fix those lies on behalf of the organizations that are targeted by those lies. So Factmata is kind of growing into a technology which is enabling companies to do it for themselves. So it's become, therefore, this whole fake news thing is actually pivoted more towards reputation management and brand safety, because every organization and every individual needs to take ownership of the narrative about themselves, right? And if you're not, you can only control what you say, but if you can see the narratives, whether they're fake or hateful or racist or whatever, if you can see those narratives earlier, and get involved, identify who the influencers are, either to kind of orchestrate takedowns, or at least understand the narratives, understand where they're coming from and why they have that view, then you can do something about it. But at the moment, and this is where we kind of we come full circle from fixing fake news to the B2B space. At the moment, tools in the reputation management space and the brand safety space, media monitoring, social listening, don't really give you the reasons why, right? And I know because I built a media monitoring system for the 2007 the Ministry of Defense, which does exactly what the media monitoring tools are still doing today, which is how many times am I being mentioned? What is the rough sentiment of those mentions? Give me a word cloud, right? These technologies, this is 15 years old, this general approach. But it's 15 years old because the problem of actually identifying narratives and understanding the reason behind the numbers is actually a relatively new problem that's only now being solved. So that's kind of where we've come from. Started out in fake news, but actually fake news is almost a red herring, right? It's a great term, and it gets, and people sort of understand what it means. But in terms of the practical fix for it, the practical application of the technology to solve it, it's actually in the brand safety and reputation management space. That's where we're going towards. So that's kind of how we kind of understood it and how we've got into it. Is organizations need to take ownership of that narrative for themselves. In fact, the way I was kind of explaining it the other day is every organization has a firewall, right? They protect their technology and their data from harmful actors. Every organization needs like a fake news firewall, right? Every organization needs to understand the potentially harmful narratives that are building about it, not just the top level good, bad, or ugly. It's what are the narratives behind those numbers, and that's what we do.
I guess we can, and there's all. I guess you can also there's the positive spin on things as well. This is whilst we're talking about the negative side of things, it's also helpful for organisations to get ahead if positive stuff starting to come out, how you can get on the back of that, and from a marketing side of things. This kind of whole world of AI is, and I'm now in this space too, in terms of how our technology enables, looks at your social media posts to work out what we believe is going to get the best engagement based on previous engagement and so on. From nowhere near as sophisticated as what you're doing, but who knows where we will be going. But it's this whole concept of opinion is divisive in its own right, because one should be allowed to have an opinion, I guess, and it's around then, but how far does that opinion go before it is you just doing it for the sake of doing it? You're a keyboard warrior, you're a Karen, you're a bad actor doing it to whip up the sentiment, either extreme left, extreme right. And I read an interesting article that was shared with me yesterday around how these AI tech companies that are looking to read emotion through facial recognition, actually probably a lot of puff. And you can't necessarily, just because I'm smiling doesn't mean I'm happy. Just because I'm frowning doesn't mean I'm sad. And based on experiments that have been done on tribes that haven't seen kind of the real world, and what does that mean? So how can I put this, almost policing yourself in terms of the technology, that you're not almost the technology isn't getting drawn into a bubble like we've seen with the Profiler days in terms of talent management. Amazon had to shut down its recruitment tool because it was trying to not hire pale male stale men, but the people was going on in the data, and actually it got even worse because it was just pivoting more and more towards that. So how do you start to unpick that, the why, rather than to your earlier point, hey, we've been mentioned X and this is the sentiment. Okay, now.
And that's, I guess, the difference between us because we're a pure technology play. So the difference between us and an agency that a brand might hire to do the analysis and give them the insights, we're literally the tool set. So PR agencies could use us, brands can use us to understand the narratives. But effectively, all we're doing is the clustering is ML, NLP based. So a number of different tweets, a single tweet could have multiple opinions within the same tweet, or it could have none, it could be garbage. But our technology simply identifies similar opinions. And that obviously is hard in itself, identifying what truly are similar opinions, because they're not going to use exactly the same words. But we identify what the similar opinions are and cluster those together in narratives, so that you as a human and whether you're in the brand or the agency, don't have to go and figure out what that trend is yourself and all the underlying data. We just present to you what the narratives are. Yes, we give you some signals based on some models that we've got, which identify, sexism, racism, clickbait, hate speech, all the things that you might be interested in trying to identify. Yes, it kind of automatically does that analysis for you, which again saves you a bunch of time, because you don't need to look through all the narratives. You just need to look through the ones that have those kind of particular truly positive or truly negative signals, opportunities and threats. But we're not doing any of the insight. We're not telling you what to make of it. We're simply doing all the grunt work to give you in a much quicker time what the interesting facts are, what the interesting kind of results are. So yeah, we're trying wherever possible in every stage in the process, from the point of which we collect the data to the processing of the data, the presentation of the data. We're actually trying to keep humans out of the loop. Because for every human you put in the loop, the bias is really hard to eliminate. So yeah, all we're doing is the underlying kind of analysis, the real grunt work. Basically, it's data science in a box, whether you're a PR agency or a brand, to save you time in identifying what those harmful or opportunist narratives really are.
And that's again, that's what I'm starting to learn around kind of the whole AI piece. AI is never going to replace humans. You still need to have the human elements in it. It's one of the AI and technology, to your point, does the grunt work and the heavy lifting for then the human to do the high value bit and look at what the data is suggesting, and then take a view on that. Sometimes it could be that you need 20, 30 years experience in the industry to trust your gut instinct, but almost be validated by what the data is telling you, and or dare I say it, challenge it. But again, it's just fascinating having these conversations, because it ties back into what I'm seeing in terms of the broader narrative of sales and marketing and B2B. And you look at the research that's now starting to come through in terms of how COVID has impacted kind of the entire digital economy of how we buy. So things like, to play this into that, Forrester was saying that now, a survey at the beginning of the year, 68% of their respondents said they can now shortlist a vendor purely on digital content. Now, it's around thinking about how that digital content is then being distributed, where it's coming from, who's talking about it, who's the influencer behind it. I don't think we'll necessarily see kind of the bad actors come in like we do in kind of the B2C or civilian narrative, but there's going to have to be, to your point, I like it, Antony, the firewall almost. How can I be really sure that what I'm, just because that person has said it backed up with that piece of research, how can I be really sure in terms of what I'm reading? But then that also then starts to shift the skill set, dare I say it, required either an agency or a brand reputation, the PR team, reputation management team, to be able to look at this data in a different way and then do something with it. And it goes back to a blog post that I read back in 2017, where she's now at Cisco, she was at LinkedIn, Katrina Neal is her name. She had a tweet saying, I paraphrase, I believe any marketer that says, I think, in front of a data-driven exec team will be asked to leave. I think you could change that. Marketing, sales, brand, finance, HR, it doesn't matter. But then the article goes on to say, do we actually need data scientists in our marketing teams, in our finance teams, to kind of support this? So I appreciate you are kind of early on in this and the conversations you're having with clients. What are you seeing in terms of the skill sets within organizations? Are they there? Do we need to review what that skill set is in terms of the right type of people to be able to actually work with technology platforms such as yours?
Yes, I think so. And it's not, obviously, it's not just in this industry, it's in every industry. The growth of AI and machine learning as technologies, where it's used well, where it's used correctly, right? It is literally where you've got a large number of tasks which are predictable in their inputs and outputs, right? Great opportunity for AI, right? So you don't have to spend as much time literally just going through the individual tweets, mentions, and articles and trying to identify a trend for yourself. You can cluster it, you can do the analysis, bang out the summary, dashboard, all that time saved. So in terms of the skill sets, you're right that it might not be different people. It may well be different jobs that those individuals do. So they're not doing the underlying analysis, kind of identifying the underlying data sets, because that's all done. What they're doing is more value add, the human creative side, which is where I think AI for me is still going to make massive differences, not just the industry, but all industries, which is the humanity of ourselves. Like, we get to spend time doing the things that we enjoy, which challenge our creative mindset, and not kind of mundane, predictable tasks. So I think in this industry, yes, it might not be different people, but it will be different tasks and different expenditure of time. Right? If you look at the pie chart of how much time people spend on things, the whole chunk where it goes on to underlying data analysis is going to shrink significantly, and therefore the amount of time you have to spend on creative, value add human work will increase. So yeah, I think we will see that, and with our early clients, that's what they're seeing. So I think this is where I think it gets interesting, is if agencies or brands are out there are still doing it one way, they're just going to end up at a competitive disadvantage to people who are doing it the other way, because those people are putting more creative human time on the topics than they are. So yeah, I think it will be not so much potentially different amount of people, but probably different tasks those people do.
Yeah, and no doubt a bit of reskilling involved in some of those people, and it'll be, I know I sound like a stuck record when I talk about TikTok, but I'm on TikTok because I need to understand it. Faces its own challenges, but some of the creatives on there, these young kids, utterly insane, and the insanity around the investment advice that's now been given around crypto and this and that. I remember way back when a former colleague of ours and his foray into crypto and talking about that. I hope he's doing okay. It's just fascinating how rapidly this is going. But if we just take a step back, so data. I'm familiar with social listening tools. We talked about the Microsoft one, which reminds me, I do need to make that introduction for you. What data are you? So obviously you're looking at social data. So you're looking at stuff that's publicly available in terms of what people are talking about. But are you bringing in, and I know you never ask leading questions, are you bringing in any third-party data? The models that you talk about that you use, are those proprietary, or are they based on kind of proven scientific theory that is out there? So how's that side of things work, without giving away obviously the secrets to the magic in the black box?
Yeah, so in terms of the data sources, we have arrangements in place. We're not a data aggregator ourselves. We just have relationships with people who do that, and there's a whole bunch of really good people out there who have first-party relationships with the platforms, or are doing crawling. So because I would say it's not just social media, it's also just general web content. So we are interested in forums and blogs and news articles, because that's also where opinions start and opinions are shared. So yeah, we actually go across the whole space. So we're not just a social media listening company. And we're technically not really a social media listening company. We're narrative analysis. We sit on top of that kind of data set. So yeah, we go across the whole of the internet, because that's where opinions are. And we sit on top of that for the analysis. So yeah, that's kind of, and I think that's where we'll probably sit, because I don't think it's good for our business, for our focus, to get dragged into trying to do the data aggregation piece. It's almost a solved problem, and there's plenty of players out there.
There's so many out there now that do buy, plug and play and buy and put it in. So then, with regards to the models around the narratives and the clustering of these opinions, is that proprietary IP, or is that based on obviously it's proprietary IP? What a stupid question, but is that based on kind of science, as it were? And the reason I asked the question, I then reflect on that article around kind of AI facial recognition and feeling and emotion, which is now starting to be kind of disproven. For those listening, I'm doing inverted commas. Yeah,
no, that is proprietary. Obviously, we've got a bunch of patents around how we do that. The underlying science, because that's where it gets interesting, right? Because you've got the underlying science in this topic is actually really relatively nascent. So there hasn't been like 10 years worth of kind of the way it's called. You get academics, get some funding, work on a problem, they develop out an idea, then it gets kind of commercialized. We're still at the commercialization stage of that early research and models. So we're still right now, our head of machine learning is still right now winning championships in kind of linguistic conferences for the papers we're writing on this problem. So it's still really early days in terms of actually trying to work out the fundamental science. So yeah, that's the stage we're at. We've actually got the models, we've got the intelligence, we've got the patents. So it's really early days, I would say, in terms of this, which is the reason why it's not more widely available, right? Because it's taken us a few $1 million of investment to get to the point we're at in terms of commercialization of that underlying science, which itself is relatively new.
Fantastic. So treat me as not difficult, as an idiot. I know most of my listeners will probably agree, but if we think in kind of the B2B space, traditional P2B, so and B2B, so any of those kind of big brands that we might be aware of, so Microsoft and SAP, kind of steady run-of-the-mill organizations, what might the use case be for them in terms of what you do? Let's kind of break that down and work through what that might look like.
Got it. So if you take take a kind of a big organization like an SAP,
yeah,
in their space, it's probably, whilst there is a B2C element to every large business these days, right? Because every large business could have supply chain issues or environmental impact or something they haven't considered, which then drives right, which then drives the B2B angle, because businesses don't want to do associate with you because they maybe B2C. And they have, so it works all the way down these days, which I think is awesome, because it means everyone is accountable these days.
And I hadn't even thought of the environment, the carbon, wanting to be carbon neutral and all. Then I hadn't even thought of the supply chain side of things. It's massive, this, isn't it? Because you could have somebody that then is, So sorry, continue. I'm interrupting.
There's no such thing as B2B really, truly anymore, because almost every business has a B2C element in terms of the brand and the reputation. So I think that's where, if you're a large organization and you're B2B, one is the basic stuff, right? You can find out what people are saying about your brand, and it doesn't matter if that's going in the B2C space. You can find out what B2B people are saying about your brand, and how they're talking about your brand compared to other brands. And you can identify those narratives related to your price, your product, your proposition, whatever. So you can do that basic stuff. You can see that also about your competitors, because you could be doing market entry, or you could just be doing competitor analysis. So the basic tool sets, the basic reasons why you want to understand what's being said about brands still exist, and we still support those. But obviously, for all of those, we do it at another level of detail. It's not just where is this brand in terms of their positive sentiment compared to me. It's what are the narratives about that brand compared to my brand. So it's always about the why, and that's what we go to. It's the qualitative kind of giving you the visuals of the why, as opposed to just the overall numbers. So that stuff all still exists. And then, of course, yes, the point I just made around just because you're B2B, you're interested in the narratives that may be relevant to your product and to your services. What are the supply chain issues? What are the risks that are out there in terms of the narratives from individuals, from the public? That might be relevant to your then potential to do business in other markets, to sell certain products. So I think the ESG element is always there.
ESG. Everyone's talking about ESG at the moment in terms of got the biggest transfer of wealth, but that's a whole separate kind of conversation. But it could be an interesting one in terms of what do people actually really think about ESG and investing in the world for good. So and I know you said you've been working with them with the Factmata for a while now, but obviously you're just new in role as chief exec as the organisation, without obviously giving away trade secrets. You're not a spook. What is the vision? What is the vision with this? Where do you want to go?
Got it. So I think the pivot that we've kind of ended up on, right, this cycle of starting out on fake news and then realizing actually it's not just about fake news, it's about brand safety and brand reputation. That's how we fix fake news. That also means if you look at the market right now, so the large organizations that can afford to either do kind of media monitoring or social listening themselves, maybe they have their own data science teams, they're collecting all the data, doing analysis themselves, or maybe they're hiring an agency to do it for them, and those are relatively large companies. If you look down the kind of the stratus, right, that it levels out pretty quickly. The companies that can afford to do that. Most companies do not do that. Most companies are on Google Alerts, right? It's because that's the cheapest, it's free. I just want to know kind of what's being said about me. So they've got basic keywords and basic services like that. And that's kind of the lower end of the spectrum. I think what we're thinking is, whilst our premium products, the tool set that comes with that is definitely targeted at brands and PR agencies to do all the rich, detailed analysis they need to do. What we want to do is make that product available to a much larger range of organizations. So creating kind of a tiered approach. So that if all you want to do is find out kind of what's being said about you and whether there's any risks, maybe there's a version of this product we can kind of make available to a much larger range of organizations. to this kind of fake news firewall point.
Yeah.
So I think where we see it going is actually, this isn't just a PR tool. This isn't just a brand tool. This is a tool for every organization to understand what fake news, what disinformation, what information is revolving around its brand and in its space. More interesting than just a keyword mention from whatever it is Google Alerts can find these days.
Absolutely, and I think this also plays into the wider narrative around, what's coming out the other side of, when we get to the other side of the world we find ourselves in, that digital is going nowhere, social media is going nowhere. New platforms are popping up left, right, and centre, and we've also seen how quickly things can go. Not even just from, dare I say it, from the hate side of things, how quickly things can just spin out of control. Even an employee doing an innocent something or other, they think something is, and then how that can spin to being front page news.
And that's the really interesting thing about the opinions, is the opinion might start on Twitter, but then end up on, because Facebook, because they're all connected, right? The ability to share goes completely across platforms. So the ability for an opinion to get shared on Twitter, go to Facebook, and then kind of end up on a bunch of different Facebook groups before it goes up to a blog, to a forum, and then it ends up in mainstream media, right? That whole chain, but it's one narrative. Yeah. And that's I think one of the biggest time savers we do, because if you were looking just at Twitter, you might see one. If you're looking just at forums, you might see the other. But the identification, that's all the same narrative. Yeah. And bringing that together in a view, I think that's one of the biggest time savers that we probably offer.
Absolutely. And then to your point, getting ahead of it,
Exactly.
Starting to, I'm not a PR expert in any shape or form, but I do understand, try and control the narrative as quickly as one can, and obviously within the framework which is appropriate, and so on and so forth. I know we could talk about this for hours, and I know that we're only scratching the surface in terms of what's to come. And I'm if we look back, if we have this call again in 10 years time, when hopefully both you and I have sold out and we're multimillionaires and we're sitting on our both private yachts waving to each other, that's the idea, right? I just don't know where it's going, but it's always good to talk to you, Antony. You're always a fountain of knowledge. Where can people are listening, if they want to kind of find you, where should I direct them to? Your profile? Is there maybe a freebie they can try on the website?
If they reach out to me on LinkedIn or hit the website, brand new website is going live literally in a day. The kind of, and it will demonstrate, I think, the pivot. If you look at it now, it's a bit more fact checky, sort of related, and our narrative monitoring product is there, but the new website is much more in depth on the narrative monitoring, and there is a kind of a contact us. We actually will be releasing kind of a sign up kind of on the website itself. So this idea of kind of like, just give me a quick look at what the threats are about my brand, that's going to be on the website, because that's where we want to get to. Everyone should be able to do this, and and that's not just kind of makes good commercial sense. It's the only way we're actually going to make a dent in this whole kind of disinformation problem, right? Is the only way to scale it is to give every organization the tool set to do something about it.
Absolutely. And for those that are listening, this has been recorded on the 5th of May. So if the website probably will already be live, the new one, by the time you're listening to this. I'll put all the links into the varying channels. But Antony, as always, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. For the listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you want to find out more about what Antony and his team are doing, please reach out. If there's anybody you want to be on this podcast, if you want to be on this podcast, then reach out and connect with me, and we'll see what we can do. But for now, Antony, thank you very much. And listeners, I will see you this time next week.